So when we talk about the focus is going to become, and already is, a massive commodity in our culture. If you can learn to focus on something and see it through in an hour or half an hour or a couple hours, you're pretty special, because most people can't do that. And a lot of the jobs that, if we want to be successful at our job, it really does require a certain level of consistency, and that consistency requires focus and kind of stick-to-itiveness. Yeah, we got to learn to speak in those 15-second funnels, but man, sometimes you just got to stick with something long enough in order to get that deep thinking that's necessary for long-term change.
Love that. Yeah. And I feel like if you keep demanding that focus and celebrating them for the focus and recognizing those that really do bring it, it builds that culture that teams want to be a part of. So I really enjoy that. As I feel like we could probably have 3 or 4 podcast conversations just right now. So with respect for time, you are listening to the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast, transforming athletes into leaders on and off the court, with host Coach Furtado. Coaches, are you ready to take your passion for coaching and turn it into a full-time career? I know the challenges firsthand, but the Make Money Coaching Sports program helped me take BTG basketball full-time. If you're tired of juggling coaching part-time and want to fully focus on doing what you love, this business accelerator will give you the tools and support to make it happen. Hit the link in the show notes below to learn more and start living your dream. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. I'm thrilled today because I got a guest on, and I love having guests like Gary Chupik, who is a professional mental performance coach, a leadership coach, most importantly, a sports nut, also a strategist, a writer, and a speaker. And he's curious, which is one of our core values over with Beyond the Game basketball. So before I dive in and really geek out about everything you're passionate about, Gary, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's dive right in there. I think your bio and just really encapsulates what I'm excited to talk about. And before we get in there, I always like to kind of understand the iceberg about, what drove you to be passionate about mental performance and leadership, especially in the world of sports.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any other field or arena in life that creates leaders better than sports. Think about all the things that it develops, right? It develops your resilience, your courage, your ability to recover from setbacks. There's so many things that are applicable to post school, and you go into your regular work life. There's nothing that prepares you better than sports. And so it's really evident. Some of the stats we were just talking about offline before we started the podcast is, there's some studies out there that talk about how many CEOs played high school or college sports. And for men, it's like 87%, and women, it's 91%. So I don't know if there's anything in life that can compare to that. And so when we are investing our life in young people, we're having a generational impact. And I think that sports does that better than anything else that the society has to offer.
I love that. And so with that being said, I love this topic of resilience. I'd love to jump off here because it's something that I am seeing at the club basketball level and just in sports in general. It's a very pay to play model, right? And so there's a lot of expectations from this is all my opinion, but from what I see in parents expecting kids, to get playtime because we paid, sort of thing. And so, or they come to us with a challenge or a problem instead of their kid coming up to us, and they're taking that agency away from their kid to be resilient. And so can you talk about the importance and the power of building resilience in our kids, especially at a young age?
Well, in my personal opinion, I think resilience is an outcome. So it's really the result of a lot of different tools that young adults and professional athletes use to become resilient. So resilience really isn't like an exercise or something that we can just sort of do at the snap of a finger. It really is an outcome. And so therefore we logically ask the question, well, what builds resilience? I think there's a lot of things, but one of them is your ability to reframe failure. Like if we redefine what success is and we redefine what failure is, I think we have a much better shot at helping young adults and teenagers and even professional athletes sort of handle failure. In other words, like one of my favorite podcasts is the Jocko Willnick podcast. And he just says, like any hardship that you experience, if you can learn to say that's good for me, then you can sort of find the positive in all the things that you go through, no matter what it is. If it's the, let's say, a setback in life, or maybe you didn't get the starting position or starting role in a position on a team, whatever it is, it's actually good for you. That's how resilience is built. And in some ways, you inoculate yourself against failure the more that you experience it. So there's something called exposure therapy in the sports psych world, where no matter what it is that you're afraid of, if you expose yourself to it more and more, it becomes less scary. But ultimately, when it comes to overcoming a fear, that the only way, all of it funnels back down to exposure therapy. And so what happens when you experience failure over and over and over again, it doesn't become that bad anymore, right? Like you
Right.
just kind of go, well, I've been here before. And so I just say have a great relationship with failure because it's normal. Alex Hormozy is a famous influencer on social media, and he has 7 failed companies before his 8th one hit. And most of the successful business people that I work with have had multiple failures. In fact, it's odd, or it would be very rare to find someone who didn't have a failure. And yet, we always admire the 21-year-old who strikes it rich. Yeah, but that's like 1 in a million, or one in
Right.
at least 100,000. And that does happen. But in reality, most of us have multiple failures, but we build off of those things so that maybe it's the next one, maybe it's the next one, maybe it's the next one. If we have 7 business failures or 7 failures in sports, the 8th one is really sweet and it really
Right.
works because we've worked so hard. So we've just changed our relationship with failure. And if we can do that and sort of get back up and sort of teach ourselves how to coach ourselves out of that, and then we can become a formidable people.
Absolutely. And so yeah, no, failure is everything. And I always say one of the things is if you're winning, like I'm in the club sports world, if you're winning every single tournament, that means you're not challenged and you're not going to get that outcome of resilience that you're kind of talking about because we're not failing enough. And so, when you're talking, you're working with, different college coaches, professional coaches, how do you approach helping them with navigating that failure, especially like at the highest level? Let's, like when there's high expectations, right? Like we can really internalize and like sometimes identify with failure versus realizing like I am not a failure. I just failed at this game or I'm sitting on the bench, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Well, I've experienced that myself. Like I've failed at things before, big
Right.
stuff, not small stuff, big
Yeah.
stuff. And what I keep telling myself, you're right. I failed at something, but it doesn't mean that I'm a failure. And so I'm not making it part of my identity. I'm sort of keeping it at arm's length and having what I call a holy detachment, right? Like I have a detachment from the failure itself. And in reality, in my eyes, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. Like you're not experimenting enough. So I think the changing the relationship to failure is just really important, and then also learning how to just deal with it and how to coach yourself out of getting depressed or feeling discouraged. Like for example, I have a definition of mindset that's taken me 7 years to come up with, and so I finally found it a couple of years ago, and I'm thrilled to share it with you. So, and the reason why it's important is because if we can identify where something happened in a mindset that's maybe less than helpful. Let's say someone's thoughts are working against them, not for them. If we can go back and find what part of the equation is where there's a bump in the road, then we can actually help that player. And so I think teaching players how to self-coach and self-talk
Yes.
is really important. Like for example, the definition, maybe the traditional definition of mindset is a conditioned set of beliefs that drive behavior. But that's not enough for me as a mental performance coach. I've got to dig a little bit deeper in order to help somebody. So the definition, like a physics equation that I've come up with, is that we have an experience that we have thoughts and feelings about. So imagine the word experience and then in brackets, thoughts and feelings.
Right.
And
Right.
if we're younger, we don't have a lot of control over those experiences. We just have thoughts and feelings. A lot of them are conscious and a lot of them are subconscious. But we have thoughts and feelings associated with that experience. But then we have my response to that. Sometimes those responses are maladaptive, like they're not helpful or are not healthy. And sometimes they are. But if we can choose to respond to the thoughts and feelings and experiences that we have in a way that's helpful to us, then that makes us very resilient, because now we get to choose our response. We have a lot of volition and self-efficacy. So once we have my response, then what happens is we actually create a belief, and typically about ourselves. So we have a belief about ourselves now. So we have an experience that we have thoughts and feelings about, that we have a response to. Now I've created a belief about myself. And if you put all of that together, you come up with a mindset. But it doesn't end there with the mindset. It actually must result in new and improved behaviors. So when the behaviors change as a result of a different mindset, now you know you have lasting change. Because if it just stays in our minds and it's just ethereal somewhere in the universe, then it doesn't translate into a new and improved behavior, then we're short-sighted about the effects of what our mindset can do. But if you think about it, a new and improved behavior is like a new experience. And then we continue the cycle all of a sudden. This is how you build a mindset. Then you give yourself a new and improved experience with new and improved thoughts and feelings, with new and improved responses, with new and improved belief about yourself, which results in a new and improved mindset, which results again in new and improved behavior. So this is how you build a mindset, and this is how you really build a resilient mindset. So if we can get someone to self-coach and say, okay, how can I go back in my own mind? Can I go back to that experience and change my response? So you almost get like a do-over in some ways. So I think if you can do that, you can self-coach yourself and build a really strong mindset.
I love that. And I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. So I'd love for you to kind of share an example of how an athlete or a coach that you've worked with used that tool, kind of this mindset PEMDAS, we'll call it, to achieve that new mindset that they wanted to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, here's a good one. So I had a hockey player that was playing on the fourth line, and he was really discouraged, and he was better than playing on the fourth line. Hockey has four lines, and he had just been really frustrated, really discouraged, and he had a lot of experience with his coaches yelling at him. And hockey is probably one of the most brutal sports there
Yes.
is
Yes.
for the way that coaches treat players. It's
Okay.
really awful. And think about it. What other sport can you have besides, maybe gymnastics and figure skating, where you a 13 or 14-year-old move away from home and go play some other city in your country or in another country, and you're kind of on your own. So they don't have that emotional support when a coach gets really upset. So he has this coach yelling at him all the time. He's a young guy, and he's just getting sort of lambasted by his coaches on a regular basis. And so he's being demeaned. And so when I start working with him, I'm like, well, take me back to a time when the coach really got upset with you and it really bothered you. So he takes me back to that time, and I just say to him, like, what would you like now that a little bit of time has passed and you're a little bit more mature, and this was, a little over a year ago. I was like, so what would you do? What would you say to yourself? What would your present, more mature
Mm.
self say to your, when you're younger self? And he said to himself, I probably wouldn't take it so seriously. I would probably just brush it off and go play my best game. I'm like, okay, interesting. Or I'd take the message, but I would remove the emotion from it. So we start working together, and we start reframing his responses to constructive criticism by his coaches. And we start removing the emotion out of it and just focusing on the message. And he goes up to the third line, moves up to the second line because he's doing so well. He moves up to the first line, and then he leads his team in scoring. So it was really about him coaching himself that he never thought that he could do, but he just needed to reframe his response and his belief about himself that changed his entire mindset.
I love that. So I'm thinking about my athletes. We do film sessions, and I always like to ask like a reflection question at the beginning and the end. So thinking about kind of bringing in this exercise, I would be asking, I'm kind of giving them an opportunity to coach themselves. And I like the idea of like, let's see, last year, when you were a freshman, let's say they're a sophomore, what advice would you give yourself? And then they're correct me if I'm wrong, they're building that habit and that skill of coaching their past selves to then build that skill to coach their present self.
You got it.
Cool. No, I think it's really profound and like pretty simple way, and you could do that in a film session or like have them like what I like to do at BTG is we have them kind of talk to their partners a little bit, like I guess, and then I could be like, hey, look, Jimmy, share with John that how what you would have done differently a year ago, but then they're building that communication skill. I really like that.
Yeah, that actually was born out of an experience that I had when I was in high school. So I remember really struggling with high school a lot, and I don't know how it happened, but I just found myself in a geo trade class in the 11th grade, and I was thinking to myself, like, what am I doing in this class? Like, I'm going to fail so badly, and I got no shot. Like, math was not my strength. So I remember sitting in class and the teacher making fun of me and putting me on the spot. And he didn't like football players, so I think he kind of had it out for us, and so he was really mean to us. So there he makes fun of me, and well, how do you think that made me feel before every class? Like even in the hallway entering the class. I mean, you can imagine what my thoughts were, right? Like I don't want to be here.
You don't want to go,
I don't
right?
want to go. Yeah, I don't want to go. I'm not good at it. So I sit in this class. I get made fun of, and my response whenever he would ask me a question, and this is a true story, I would make up an answer that was so outrageous that the entire class would laugh. So he would say, Gary, what's the answer for number 7? I would say 3.1671489412387677148. And then the entire class would laugh. But here's the thing. I was not a class clown. This was just my response in this equation to an experience that I had thoughts and feelings about. So I created a response that tried to make everybody laugh. It was a self-protective mechanism. And that's all that I had. And so everyone thought I was a class clown, which I totally wasn't. So here's if I could like coach myself through it, what I would do is I would be the invisible man and I would walk up to myself, whisper in my own ear in that desk on the right side, second from the front, and I would say, hey, Gary, listen, math may not be your thing, but you're a smart guy. Gary, did you know that there are 9 different kinds of intelligence? There's linguistic intelligence, there is mathematical intelligence, there's kinetic intelligence, there's musical intelligence. There's all these different kinds of intelligence, and math wasn't one of them for me. And yet, most of the stuff that was in school that I learned, like math and science, I was not good at. It was not my thing. But you know what they didn't teach in high school? They didn't teach psych and they didn't teach philosophy. And those were my 2 strengths. But I never knew that because I
Right.
was in high school and I didn't get to go to those classes where they weren't offered. So looking back over it, I graduated with high honors. Not to brag, but I graduated with high honors in for my master's degree. But I just needed to be in the right realm. And so going back to myself and just saying, hey, listen, you know what? If I would have known then what I know now, I would just tell myself, hey, math is not your thing, but there are other things that are, and don't worry about it. Because I literally thought I was never going to go to university or college because I wasn't smart enough. So I literally was trying to avoid going to college because I had thoughts and feelings and a self belief that I just wasn't very smart. And that was my mindset that I was never going to amount to much because I wasn't smart. And so that's a really great example of how to shift your own mindset.
It is, and I think it's also a great recognition of curiosity and like the beauty of sports for these kids because like for most of the kids in our program, like they love basketball more than they love math, right? So how can we get them to be learn how to be lifelong learners through sport so that they can be, eventually maybe they get into psychology or they want to be a physical therapist because they have different ankle challenges, so just like kind of almost guiding and nurturing them to like be a lifelong learner just through sport.
Exactly. It's kind of like find your brilliance, right? Go
Right.
discover, be curious about yourself. And a lot of people talk about passion. Passion's on a very reliable direction sort of giver. I mean, I have ambition to be a rock star and an NFL linebacker, but I'm not. I'm not wired for that. It's not how I'm made. So what am I made for? And fit is far more important than passion. because when you find your fit, things come easy to you, right? You get more confidence doing things that you have a fit for, and you have more competence and more skill and more talent in that area, and you can find your flow state in that area. So I think fit is more important than passion.
And I feel like fit kind of aligns with purpose as well. And so I kind of want to talk about, obviously my purpose here I feel like is to make an impact on youth. And I say with Beyond the Game basketball, our mission is to prepare young athletes to be successful beyond the game and to help
Mm.
them become leaders. And I think we talked about kind of the first thing that I think great leaders do is they coach themselves. I also want to kind of continue the ball down this road and what are some of the things that you feel like some of the best coaches do to build athlete-led teams?
Mm. Oh, that's a fantastic question, one I haven't heard before. There's a couple different things. Being a leader for 33 years, I made a lot of mistakes, so I learn a lot.
Right.
But there's a couple different things. And number one, and I kind of got this off Nick Saban because I just thought it was brilliant, and I think he really knows what he was talking about. And so he was talking about how complicated coaches make things. And he said, really, it's far less complicated than what you're making. And now he might be being a bit generous with that, but he always says, define the vision of your team. Like, what is the overall vision that you have for your organization? That's number one. And number two is define the roles. Everybody's got a role. And so when everyone does their role really well and you've defined the vision, that's half of the battle. Number three is you have a daily scorecard or a weekly scorecard, right? Like in football, it's wins and losses, but you've got to have some type of scorecard that you're using to identify whether your organization is being successful or not. And number four, what does daily execution look like? And I just love the simplicity of that he taught. Actually, he taught this at a car dealership, which
Okay.
was really fun. And he was like, you know what? It's no different for a car dealership. It's no different for a business. It's all the same thing. It's not that complicated. And I really appreciate that. So I would say number one, keep it simple. Like one of the most common things that I hear coaches talk about is the sense of overwhelm. There is so much to learn. There's so much to be. You can't even meet your own expectations, never mind anybody else's. So when you keep things simple, then you have a shot at sort of like bringing in the fences a little bit and containing what you're trying to accomplish. I love John Wooden. He says, every year, even if a player is in the third or fourth year, I'm teaching them how to tie their shoes. And what's really funny about that is that I used to tie my shoes in a way that my shoelaces would always come undone.
Right.
And for years and years and years, I made fun of my wife because of the way that she tied her shoes. I just thought it was really strange. And then one day she said, why don't you just try it my way? And my shoelaces stopped coming undone. And I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh, all these years I was making fun of her. And now I'm the moron. So you really do have to keep things simple, and then that way you can focus more on the execution instead of trying to put a key in the door here, or try this magic potion, or try this, or try. They're sort of short-term solutions for long-term problems, and they don't work. So I would say find a system that you really can invest in, and that you really think is a great system, and just keep with it. If you're convinced that it'll work, listen, I mean, it doesn't mean don't be curious, and it doesn't mean learn, grow, and adapt. It just means buy into something long enough where the people around you can be excited about what you're doing. Because listen, if a leader is not predictable, if a leader is not predictable, then nobody really knows what the leader wants when they're not around. But great leadership is predictable leadership. It means that they've established a culture. And so, yeah, keep it simple, establish your culture, and just sort of commit to the execution rather than try a bunch of different keys. It's almost like you're always stuck in first gear if you don't.
Right. And I think when I was like, I'm still a young coach, but when I first started out like 5, 6 years ago, I like I wanted the buy-in immediately. So I was like, if something didn't work, I wanted to change it right away. And like I was like, oh, it doesn't work, I want to change it. It doesn't work, I want to change it. Instead of kind of talking about going back to the first part of our conversation and using resilience as a coach. And like I remember like my first time coaching high school basketball.
I've been coaching like 4 to 14-year-olds, and like, I was like intimidated. I remember I was like, these guys are dunking and stuff, like not my freshman team, but just in general. And I was like, oh man, they're not buying into like high-fiving each other after one practice. Oh, I'm just going to forget about it. But like, now I understand that it takes time. And so like, if we want to build like our leaders, like I make them huddle with each other. I will literally grab their arms and put them around each other every single time. And I'm just going to do it over and over and over again until they figure it out. Because then eventually they do buy in, and then they do, start leading the team a little bit more. But it does kind of take time, like you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like they need the repetition, right? And there's no substitute for repetition. You just have to keep doing something over and over and over again. There's a little principle that I have, which is called perfect the simple. Like just perfect the simple things and work on that so much that it just becomes second nature to you. And that's what we practice, right? That's why we practice relentlessly, is so that perfecting the simple just becomes normal.
Right. Instead of being, I think it's, if you emphasize everything, you emphasize nothing, right? So just emphasize those few simple actions, whatever that is for your team and your sport, and then go out and execute that every single day. And just watch, we've been talking about good food cooked slow is kind of been some of our mantra for some of our teams. And so I really like that. And so with that being said, still staying on this topic of leadership, because I think, this is my personal opinion, leadership for young people is the most important skill that we can teach as just adults, right? As parents listening to this, as coaches listening to this, what do you think are some necessary leadership skills that we need to be teaching to our youth athletes?
Yeah, well, can I build a framework?
Please.
So I created something called the leadership pyramid. And I love it. Like I created it a few years, like probably 10 years ago. But the more I think about it, the better it is and the more solid it is. So think of a pyramid, and on the bottom layer is self leadership. Your ability to lead yourself is at the core, or is the foundation of everything that you're going to build in your life. So even if you're not motivated, it actually is of little consequence. Working with professional athletes like I do, I almost never hear them talk about motivation. Almost never. I've gone to mental performance and sports psych conferences, and we rarely talk about motivation. I think it's talked about in pop culture or on social media or on, let's say, a motivational video. But performance at the highest levels, motivation is just not part of the equation. Self leadership, that is your ability to lead yourself even when you're not motivated, is the difference maker. So imagine someone who is only going to practice hard when they're motivated, or only play hard when they're motivated. Then that's like a roller coaster, a white knuckled roller coaster, because you're going to have ups and downs. But the athlete who is self-led doesn't have to be motivated. Now, it's great if they are. It's that extra layer of performance or emotional engagement, but it's really not as necessary as most people think it is. I remember talking to one of my good friends in the NFL, and I asked him, how important is motivation? He was like, "What? Like, no, like I'm no, it's my job. It's my job to be good." And I was like, "Oh, that's such an interesting take on this, right?" Like, I just think it's super fascinating. And maybe now and again, every now and again, they'll get punched in the mouth, and then they're like, "Okay, it's game on. Let's go." But then that athletes are really difficult to beat. So what I'm trying to do is create hard to beat athletes, and the best ones are self motivated. So if you do self leadership well, and then you can lead another person, that layer is called couple leadership. So it's not a romantic thing. It's just that, can you lead another person? So if you can lead yourself well and be a good example to somebody else, and then, yeah, you're living a life worthy of someone else following you. And the sequence to this is extremely important. So when you can lead someone else, then you can lead a group, which is the third layer. You have group leadership. And group leadership is incredibly important, because not only do you have to have the credibility of self leadership, like you have to have character and integrity, but every great group leader is training or mentoring or coaching the next leader. So now you have group leadership, but couple leadership is necessary. In fact, it's demanded, right? It's a necessity that you lead somebody else before you can lead a group. And then once you lead a group, you can lead an area or department, which is sort of like a group of groups, and then you can lead an organization. And so for you, being a leader in your organization, you're at the top, right? But you have to show great self-leadership. And the moment you compromise that self-leadership with your lack of character or integrity or your word, then the entire organization fractures. And we see this here in Seattle, where I'm from, with some of the big companies like Boeing. At Boeing, they have, planes, that's doors are falling off mid-flight, and nobody's taking responsibility. And because nobody takes responsibility at Boeing, then, people don't pluck Boeing executives because they're not honest. They're plucking from Amazon, they're plucking from Microsoft, but they're not plucking Boeing. So that's a great warning sign for an entire organization to make sure that its leaders lead with character and integrity. Because if you don't, you'll send stress fractures up the entire organization.
Percent. And I feel like this is one of the things, leadership, like you have to have humility. Like you've admitted already multiple times for you yourself as a leader that you've made many failures like along your journey. And so yesterday I'll share this story with the coaches that are listening and the parents that are listening. Like I just made a mistake, a pretty big mistake, where I told the kid like he was going to move up to the A team. I texted him that earlier this week. And then the kid because there was another kid coming into the program, I didn't think I wasn't sure. I guess I just wasn't sure how good he was going to be. So I was going to stick him right on the B, but I was like, oh, he could be on the A. So like I had like flipped my word. And then, I got some text after, and the kid was devastated, right? Because I didn't meet my word. I pretty much lied to him. I said he's going up, and then I kept him there. And so after, I'm like, oh, I didn't even like realize it at the time, right? Because I was like so excited. Oh, this kid coming in. Oh, he could just come right here. And then I just admitted to the dad. I sent a voice message to the kid. I said, I messed up. Look, I made a mistake. You're playing on my team, the A team, that I pretty much like, yeah, I messed up. Right. And so really being able to model that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, well, you basically identified and modeled how to respond to a mistake that you made, right? And it wasn't really you lying; it was just you miscalculating, in that moment. But you went back and you made it right, and that makes all the difference in the world. Like I tell people, like you can make a lot of mistakes in life. You can make a lot, but there are a couple mistakes as a leader that'll really hurt you, and character and integrity are the two biggest.
Yes.
So you had the character and integrity to go back to those parents or to that player and correct what you did wrong. And that says more about you than not making or than making the mistake in the first place. The fact that you went back. And I think organizations are just begging for that kind of leadership because it's rare these days.
And that's what the dad said. The dad said, like, first off, thank you for just admitting that you make a mistake. Like most coaches wouldn't make a mistake,
Yeah.
admit. And like,
They would have,
right. But I just feel like it's like a requirement to be a leader. Like I make mistakes all the time, especially, for me as now a fiance, you make mistakes. Like you're not as attentive as you should be. And so, I think it's just always there's always a learning opportunity. I think that's what I've kind of going back to our beginning of our conversation, like that failure is such a good learning opportunity. And so one of the things I want to talk about is some of our athletes in our program are such perfectionists. They're so hard on themselves and they're like so rigid when they play. And I know you've worked with many athletes like this. So how can I help those athletes?
yeah. I mean, perfectionism is a weird coin because it has two sides, right? And they both look very similar. They're both heads almost. But on the one hand, your perfectionism is what makes you great at what you do,
Right.
right? Like so, you're very meticulous in a way. The dark side of that is that you're hard on yourself, and it distracts you from being at your very best. So there's an emotional reaction to an expectation that you didn't fulfill with yourself. And so maybe we need to change the expectations that you have about yourself and your performance. And I think the perfectionism is an indication of their own self belief, right? So they have, remember that mindset equation, they have an experience that they have thoughts and feelings about. And so the response is to be really hard on themselves somehow. And they formed a belief about themselves that they can't make mistakes or certain kinds of mistakes, and they do. And so I think one of the things that I like to teach players is it's a two-part process. So number one is to hit that red reset button often. So George Kittle from the 49ers literally has a red button on his uniform. So he would hit that red reset button and it's like the last play is over. It's done. Like it doesn't even exist. The only place it exists is on the film that they'll look at the next day. But whether it was a good play or a bad play, it doesn't, because you still have to hit the reset button a second after it's done to get back to the huddle, to get your next play. It can't have you ruminating, which means chewing, like it's an agricultural term, chewing your cud, right? So you're bringing back something out of your stomach and chewing on it, but you can't ruminate on it. You have to let go of it almost immediately so that you can perform at a high level at the next play. And so part A is hitting the reset button, and part B is going into neutral thinking. So neutral thinking is not allowing the positive or the negative experience of your last play enter your mind for this next one. So you are completely hitting the reset button and going into neutral thinking. So all of your focus and all of your attention is on the next play.
I like that a lot. And so one of the things that I've been doing, because we have for club basketball, it's a little different for the high school coaches that are listening because you have bigger teams. And if you sub someone out, you can't sub them right back in. But one of the things is like if I have a bad body language or someone doesn't get back on defense, what I'll do is I'll just sub them out, I'll teach, and I'll put them back in. Now, what I can do is kind of what I'm hearing you, say is like they have to have a reset, right? Whether it's, I've taught two clap before or something. Like if I see them do that, boom, I'll keep them in. I won't bring them out, but I'll this is also an opportunity for me and my coaches. Okay, they didn't do their reset. All right, we're bringing them out. All right, what should your ask that reflection question like we had talked about at the beginning? What should your reset be? What should you have done differently? I should have done this, coach. Okay, great. Go get X, right? And so we're kind of giving those teaching opportunities. I really like that.
Yeah.
And it could be anything.
Yeah, it is. Like there was a player, a high school player I was working with. I don't do high school very often, but working with a high school player, best kid on his team, he just wasn't playing like it.
Yeah.
And he would ruminate constantly on previous plays. He would be frustrated with himself or play angry. Well, you play angry because you're not meeting your own expectations, or other people are not meeting yours, or you're not meeting other people's. So he would miss a layup and just be flustered. Like just after the first play of the game, he'd be flustered. And so just to help him, just like let it go, it doesn't exist anymore. And the guy led his team in scoring for the rest of the year. And then he went into the playoffs, and then he got offered a scholarship. So it's he's athlete of the year in his high school, but it was his ability to reset and to go into neutral thinking that was the difference.
Right. No, 100%. And so for those athletes that are like, I have one athlete in particular who's like, he does all his own research. Like he does a ton of, he just wants to get everything perfect. And he's like thinking about the moves. Like, how do we access that flow state to just like play? Because I feel like most of the time, right, the best athletes, they're just playing, right? They're not overthinking everything.
Yeah. Like that term overthinking is one of the most common problems that I hear with athletes. So think of thoughts like calories. If you have too many calories, you get slow and lethargic. And it's the same thing with
Mm,
thoughts. If
I
you
like that
have
a
too
lot.
many thoughts as an athlete, you get slow and lethargic. It actually weighs you down. So I think the most important thing when it comes to overthinking is just limiting the things that you allow yourself to think. So I developed a system or a process. I'm happy to share it with your audience, which is called CAPE, CAPE. And I've used it in multiple situations. I've used it in FBI, tactical, professional sports. It just works everywhere. In fact, it's even wider than that. It'll work in your everyday life constantly. So let me know what you think of this. So C stands for control yourself. So take that, universal sign to relax is take a deep breath. Like physiologically, it's like in our DNA. You take a deep breath, you're just telling yourself to relax. So C stands for control yourself. A stands for assess the situation. Okay, what do I need to do? Where am I supposed to go? What's the call from the coach? And your brain is like remarkably amazing. It's fast. It's so fast you can't even comprehend. You can't even be conscious of all the thoughts that you're having. So assess the situation. P stands for plan. Make your plan. And by the way, all this can take place in 5 seconds or 7 seconds.
Right.
That's really remarkable. Or even on the fly. So make a plan. And then E stands for execute, which has three components: trust your plan, trust your training, and trust your instincts. And when a player can trust their training and their instincts along with their plan, they become formidable. But that trusting your instinct piece is the not thinking part where they can get into flow state and just play.
I like that a lot. And then Can you kind of give an example? Like I'm kind of thinking about it in my own head, but like how a football player, a basketball player, a baseball player would use that in after an at bat or something quick.
Well, it works for every position in baseball, but baseball is a great example because you have anywhere between 14 and 17 seconds per pitch. So I want to control all 14 seconds of what a player is thinking. Because if I can control all 14 seconds in a way that helps them win, and that's a really great system because it means that they won't be thinking about their last failure at bat. It means that they won't be thinking about the handsome or the pretty person in the stands or the smell of hot dogs. Like they're focusing on their caping in that 17 seconds. So imagine a baseball player. He's coming up to bat. He takes that deep breath. He controls himself. He scratches his head or his arm or something, and it's he tightens his glove. Like it's the same thing. So he's gaining control of himself or herself, and then they're assessing the situation. What's the pitch count? Which way is the wind blowing? What's the call from the manager? Am I supposed to hit it to left field or right field, or am I supposed to take a pitch? You're getting all these messages. You're assessing the situation. Where are the runners on the base paths? What's the situation? The P is what's my plan. So if I get an inside pitch, I'm gonna have to fight that thing off to hit it to right field because that's what the plan is from the coach. And so it's like, well, what am I going to do if it's an outside pitch? It should be fairly easy. I can hit it to right field. So they're making a plan, and it might have multiple variables, but they're making a plan. And then the E is the execute. Trust your training, trust your plan, trust your instincts.
Right, and you could just remind yourself too. I like that a lot. And then while we're on this kind of topic, while you talk about focus, I feel like this is a big topic that I'm not sure. I'm sure actually, I'm sure a lot of college coaches are talking to you about it with, this generation of Instagram and social media, TikTok, blah, 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 whatever. Focus is a big thing, right? Like how do coaches really encapsulate focus in their athletes?
It's more difficult today than it has ever been because of the dopamine hits that people get from social media. I mean, people are spending anywhere between, like, the average 14-year-old or 13-year-old is spending between 2 and 4 hours a day
It's a lot. It's a lot.
on social media. And the problem is they reinforce the negative habit every morning when they wake up. The very first thing that they do, and us as adults too, if we're not careful, is the very first thing we do is that we teach ourselves to be reactionary. And so
Mm-hmm.
they're opening up their phone and they're going to social media, who liked, who didn't like, and see what everybody else is doing. It's just filled with dopamine hits. And it teaches you to be reactionary rather than actionary. And so when this is reinforced on a daily basis, all they learn to do is think passively. They don't think aggressively. They think defensively. They never think offensively. And offense becomes very scary to them. And so we as coaches, we're dealing with a predisposition of reaction rather than action. And it's really interesting. One of my clients that I've had, he was my first $100,000 client. This business person paid me $100,000 to coach him. In the second session that I had with him, he had me fly down to Vegas, and I'm in his office, glass window, and I'm there for a year with him. And we were going through a coaching session, and he stopped me about 10 minutes into the session, and he asked me to leave his office. And I was like, what in the world is going on? Did I offend him? What's going on? He asked me to leave his office because he wanted to take action on the new mindset that he had right in that very moment before he lost it. So he asked me to leave. I was outside of his office for about 20 minutes. Then he waves me back in and he says, "Thank you very much. You made me $1.2 million." So I thought I was a good deal at 100,000, right?
Right.
But
Like, where's my commission, right?
yeah, exactly. But he was so determined to take action that he couldn't even wait till the end of the session to do it. And that's what we're looking for in a client that's really hungry to learn and grow. Can't wait to put this stuff into action. So when we talk about the focus is going to become, and already is, a massive commodity in our culture. If you can learn to focus on something and see it through in an hour or half an hour or a couple hours, you're pretty special, because most people can't do that. And a lot of the jobs that, I mean, if we want to be successful at our job, it really does require a certain level of consistency. And that consistency requires focus and kind of stick-to-itiveness. You know, yeah, we got to learn to speak in those 15-second funnels, but man, sometimes you just got to stick with something long enough in order to get that deep thinking that's necessary for long-term change.
Love that. Yeah. And I feel like if you keep demanding that focus and celebrating them for the focus and recognizing those that really do bring it, it builds that culture that teams want to be a part of. So I really enjoyed that. As I feel like we could probably have 3 or 4 podcast conversations just right now. So with respect for time, um, I would love for you to kind of share any last kind of words or thoughts for those that are listening, and then, where they can find you, what resources you offer, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I think I'd like to leave this with your audience, and that is that there's a sort of a overarching principle that I think is so valuable that I think it's one of the greatest pieces of gold that I could ever give to anybody if they were to ask me. And I would say this, that is that you cannot control outcomes, but you can always put yourself in the best position to succeed.
Yes.
So don't worry about the outcome, just worry about being in the best position to succeed. Like in sports, if you're out of position, you got no shot. But if you're in position, then you have a shot at accomplishing your wildest dreams. A good friend of mine is Eric Thomas. He's an influencer on Instagram, and he often talks about miracle territory. You got to put yourself in miracle territory in order for amazing things to happen. So you don't have to control the outcome, but you got to put yourself in position for it. So don't worry about the outcome. Just worry about what is the best position for me to be in to receive that outcome, and just worry about the position. Like, do everything you can to put yourself in the best position to succeed. Whether that's your diet, like did you eat well before your performance, or a week before your performance? Did you hydrate well? Did you exercise well? Did you sleep well? Did you watch film? Like, did you put yourself in the best position to succeed? Worry about that, and the outcomes will happen. So that's the best piece of advice that I think I can give anyone. And if people want to find me, most of my clients are on Instagram. So I am Elite Mindset with a blue dot, and they can always contact me on there. And then on LinkedIn, Gary Chupik. But one of the things that I have that I can offer your audience is a mental performance assessment. So it's elitemindset.assessment.com. That's elitemindset.assessment.com. And if you type in the words in all caps, elite 50, you can get 50% off the exam. Usually these cost anywhere between $30 and $120, and mine's only $19.99, and half of that is only like $10. So for $10, we can measure every area of mental performance there is.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time today, Gary. And I love that you left us off there, because beyond the scoreboard, right? It's all about what can we control that's beyond the scoreboard that'll get us the results we want.
I
So
love that.
really appreciate your time. We'll have to get round 2 sometime soon.
Sometime soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and share it with a friend, coach, or parent you feel like would get value from this episode. It's our responsibility to impact as many parents and coaches who are the ones that are impacting our athletes. That's how we create a ripple effect. So thank you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to serving you all next week.